surprised that so many people came in this rain.
Well, it was you. You see, they couldn't miss the chance of meeting this great man.
No way, it was you, Helena.
I love the cover of this book. This is, you see, you're seeing Ted. Oh God, of course. I'm so sorry. Apparently, there's a recording being made, and therefore it matters. My voice usually reaches to the back of most rooms. But Ted, you look so judicial in this picture. You're very, handsomely looking, sort of firm and wise.
I was visiting one of the mass graves in Bosnia.
Oh, this is when this was taken?
Yeah.
Oh.
And this was not a very cheerful occasion.
No, I know, but you do look very wise and very judicial, I think. Well, listen, it's really great to have so many of you in this room. And can I just tell you, you're in the presence of a truly great man. And I'm really glad that you've come to hear.
Great woman.
Oh, the truth is, we're in love. Anyway, we do love each other, it's fair to say. We've become very good friends since working together. And I was saying upstairs when we were having a discussion with some of your team that Ted, I was part of a panel of lawyers and we were reviewing evidence for the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor, in relation to the terrible events in the Middle East, in Gaza, on the 7th of October and thereafter in the war that followed on. And the court was going to pursue warrants in relation to the leadership of Hamas, but also we were very secretly told that they thought enough evidence to pursue warrants in relation to Premier Netanyahu and the Defence Minister Gallant, who had led the policy on the war. And so a number of us were asked to look at that evidence and to see our role was to really, just as lawyers, apply our lifetime's experience to see, does this evidence reach the threshold for application for warrants? And that's a very different threshold, legal threshold, from the one that you need in order to try someone or convict somebody. It's a much lesser level of threshold. But it still makes demands to make sure that you're not, there's no sort of, if you like, motivations that might than being based on the evidence. And a panel was put together, and there were two judges, distinguished judges, Ted Meron and Sir Adrian Fulford, who was a Court of Appeal judge here and who recently retired at that time, and then four sort of senior counsel, and then two leading academics. And we gathered together. I had known Ted slightly because of I met you in Oxford when you came and you had dined at my college, I think, didn't you?
You invited me to Mansfield.
I did. I invited him to Mansfield because I was a terrible sort of fangirl.
I'm still a visiting fellow.
And you're my visiting fellow. And so we had met, but I'd never worked with Ted. And then working on that panel with you, and I always say it to everyone, and everyone who was on the panel agrees with me, it was being a master class. We all sat at his feet, and it was really witnessing a truly amazing and brilliant lawyer cut through the detritus, recognize the places where evidence was of such substance that it couldn't be in any way ignored. It was a privilege to work with you on it. And then, of course, we did that over a number of months, and it will never be forgotten. It was a really changing point for me in my legal life, but it created a great friendship for us.
There's no question about the friendship. I think that you were really our leader in that group.
No, but I must tell you,
there were so many things on which we were exactly on the same page.
On the same page, it's really true. Things to do with women and things to do with children and things to do with
women.
Yeah, particularly with the women, yeah. So let me just tell you that that's how we know each other. And I want us to go back because I do want you all to buy this book because it tells the most incredible story of a life very well lived but a life that has been full of both rich and wonderful experience, but full of pain too, and loss. And I'm afraid loss is the price that we all pay for love. And
True.
it is true. And so I'm going to start by asking you to sort of just cover over that piece of your early landscape, because I mean you were there. You're a Holocaust survivor. You were a child in Poland, 9, running around and paying visits to your grandfather's
Quarries.
That's right, and to the places which were great playgrounds for a 9-year-old boy, and all the things that made up a really rather lovely childhood. And then there was the day that Poland was invaded by the Nazis. Just tell our audience a little bit about that experience and about your family. Your big brother was some years older than you. How
5 years
he was
old.
5 years older, and there was just the 2 children.
Correct.
But you had an extended family, and it was your parents, but you also had your grandparents, and you had aunts and uncles and so on. How many survived?
Very few.
Yeah, I mean, in your immediate family, it was you
And my father.
and your dad. That's right, your dad. Yes, of course.
But it was, it was sort of incredible change overnight. The college, the city where I was born, was very close to Germany, and it was occupied by the Wehrmacht 2 or 3 days after September 1, when Hitler's army committed this terrible aggression against Poland. And my life completely changed. I'm from pampered childhood in a middle-class family. Suddenly, the total loss of autonomy, the total loss of being able to decide what you would like to do next, the total lack of schools and children to play with. I found it extremely difficult. I wrote a poem recently, which was published, which I called "He Was a Lonely Boy," and I spoke about the importance of daydreaming during those days, and how critically important daydreaming was about sort of escaping the reality in which I was so much involved. And it was these were horrible years, and it had, those years also had a tremendous impact on me, because one of the things that I missed most during that period between the age of 9 and the age of 15 was not going to school, not having an education. And I still have tremendous holes in my education, which I would be ashamed to admit to you.
How's your algebra?
Horrible, horrible. But there are things like remembering how many days a month has. One of those things which I'm
didn't
afraid
learn the rhyme. You know, 30 days has September, April, June, and November. No,
you have to be a child of a certain age to know this by heart.
I know, but
And I missed that. And then that, so I emerged from the Second World War with a sort of obsession, tremendous hunger for education, for being with people my age, for not being only with adults, for not being constantly guided by the instinct which was dominating everything, instinct of survival. And it was very hard. It was not an easy way, but I tried to do it, and I tried to do it in a way in which, looking backwards, and you know my age, I will.
He is a man in his 90s, I should tell you, but
Sorry.
we don't have to take it further than that.
95. You look backwards and you say to yourself, my conscience is very clear.
Yeah. Well, reading this book, that moral compass that has guided you in your life is obviously incredibly strong. I wanted just to refer to the fact that, I mean, you describe in the early part of the book that whole business of being turned into a refugee sort of almost overnight, having to take to the roads, the incredible business of, you know, finding woodlands to camp in and to hide in as you made the long trek to try and get to a place of safety. The way in which an uncle helped you to eventually get to the Warsaw Ghetto as a family.
Not Warsaw, Częstochowa.
Sorry?
Częstochowa.
Częstochowa. And then the horrors of what happened to your mother and father. Well, you know, your dad survived, but to your and to your brother. I mean, the Nazis.
And my paternal and maternal grandparents. And all the rest.
Yeah, and you in your book, you're incredibly. You show, in a way that often is not included, is the way in which others too suffered those horrors, the Roma, and other different minorities, the persecution. But the shocking thing that a third of all Jews in those occupied countries, a third of all Jews were murdered. I mean, it's incredible. It's just extraordinary to imagine.
I was invited by the UN Secretary General a number of years ago to speak, to give a keynote.
I have the date of it. It was the 27th of January, 2020.
And one woman from Israel who came for the occasion, by the name of Shahar, I believe, spoke about her experience in the Holocaust. And she said basically her idea, the point she was making, Hitler failed because I am here, I have survived. And I said to myself, well, if this is called failure for Hitler, having completely annihilated a culture, a community, those incredible numbers of people, no, I don't think that Hitler has failed in that respect. But I have been asked over time to give a number of talks about the Holocaust. I will give a few later this month. And I'm trying to put the Holocaust in some kind of more ecumenical context. Because while there's no question that Hitler had an obsession about Jews, and the Jews were the primary target of the Holocaust, at that time the word genocide did not exist.
That's right.
There were others who were clear targets for annihilation. And Roma is something that you all know about and we think about. But take Poles. Poland was Poles were regarded as subhuman, and Poland was regarded as something very suitable for Hitler's Lebensraum. He will take over Poland and Germans will be able to settle there. And we don't often remember that more than 1 million Poles were slaughtered by the Germans, the entire top clergy, the officers' class, the academics. And I think it's terribly important when we think about the Holocaust. And that was before the later development of international law, introduced through Raphael Lemkin, the term genocide. That genocide was in part implemented already with regard to non-Jews, and had Hitler won, I don't know what would have remained from liberal, progressive Europe.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to put the Holocaust in that context, and I often discuss. I still, after all those years, unfortunately I don't think about it too often because otherwise I would do nothing else. I think, how can we explain the Holocaust? How can we explain that a country which has produced Kant and Bach and Beethoven could be led, could agree, could be complicit in being led by a monster and commit all those crimes and live with it? And so in my talks about the Holocaust, I try to talk a little bit about my mystery of the anti-Semitism, which is also, I think, something which is very, very difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm. You went on an incredible journey. As the war ended, you were only 15. You were only 15. You were without family, really. Your father had survived, but for reasons of the family, he didn't make the journey with you. But you went to British Palestine. I mean, I think it was made possible. They were looking for places to get people to as refugees after the war. And you went there, and you had an aunt and uncle, and they took you under their wing, and they recognized that you had been without a childhood, that your childhood ended when the invasion of Poland took place. And they really did give you those educational opportunities which changed your life. But there must have been a hole left in your heart over what you'd experienced.
I think that it has happened not only to me, but to quite a few people who survived the Holocaust. That the first sort of reaction, which was very instinctive, not something rational that you would think about, is that for years after that you tried to forget. I never thought that victimhood is particularly glorious. I did not want to think about it. After the war, I suffered frequently from nightmares, so I did not want to add to that. My uncle and aunt in Israel were really quite amazing in providing me with tutors for practically every subject that you had. Because of my age, I had to go to a fairly high grade of high school, and in Israel, here is somebody who basically went only to 2 or 3 first grades of primary school, and then has to go to one of the higher grades of a high school. And the languages which would be relevant would be either Hebrew or English, and I did not know a word of either of these. So this was a very hard time, and somehow it worked. A very important.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We need to hold it closer.
Surely.
Closer.
I'm terribly sorry. A very important French statesman woman who spent some years in Auschwitz, Mrs. Veil.
Simone Veil.
Simone Veil wrote a book called Une vie, a life.
A life, yeah.
And she spoke of something which I found, I was amazed by the similarity. She spoke of the fact that after she was liberated from Auschwitz and returned to France, during the first few years in France, she completely refused both to think
or
and
speak
to
about
talk about Auschwitz. And then some years passed, and she reached the conclusion wisely that you have to live the life that you still have. You have to love, to form a family, to think not of those terrible things, but perhaps to learn from them, to know that you should you should not in any way tolerate things in which you are somewhat or more than somewhat complicit with those things. A famous professor of history in Oxford gave a number of years ago a talk to the Chabad Society in Oxford, and he said, if I'm praying, I am praying that none of us should ever contribute to things like the genocide, and that none of us should do the things or think the thoughts that make genocide possible, because genocide and Holocaust would not have been committed were it not for the complicit, for the acquiescence of millions of people.
Yeah. Now, you as you've described, your aunt and uncle were incredibly supportive. You went to the university, and you got a law degree, and you entered government service as a young lawyer, and you ended up being in the foreign ministry, and rose to great heights within it.
Well, I was very lucky.
You were very clever, and very studious, and very diligent.
Well, I had a lot of luck, I must tell you, when I finished the Hebrew University. And I had to, during those 4 years in the law faculty, I also took a job because my family did not have much
money.
Much money of that time. And I was terribly interested in international law and in public, in human rights. And I said to myself, I would like to make a small contribution to avoiding tolerating situations such as in the 30s and 40s. And I realized that I would like to continue my education. So I went to my professor of public international law, for whom I wrote a fairly decent paper, and asked for a recommendation. And he gave me a recommendation, and then I said to myself, well, the place to go to continue my studies would be the United States, which they had a lot of international law. So I applied to 8 universities. 7 of them said, no way.
Turned you down.
We are not interested. And imagine, I said 1 yes, and the 1 yes came from Harvard Law School.
Well, just that little place. That little place.
Which was, I called my book 1,000 Miracles, and that was one of the very first ones. And
I think one of the first ones was surviving what happened before. But the miracle of getting into, I don't know how miraculous that was, but I'm glad you did go to Harvard.
And then the first year at Harvard was extremely difficult. My father was allowed, under the then regulations, currency regulations in Israel, to send me $100 a month. And I can assure you that this was not, even then, a lot of money. The scholarship I got, you will not believe it nowadays, was $800 from Harvard. Now, $800 at the time was enough to pay the entire tuition. The tuition now maybe $60,000, $70,000, whatever. And fortunately, my grades at Harvard were strong. I did not very much like my first legal education, which I got, which I found extremely sort of orthodox conservative. You had to learn things by heart, special rules of procedure. The idea of having open book examinations did not exist at all. So it was really at Harvard that I felt comforted with regard to my original project of focusing on international law, humanitarian law, and human rights. That a Socratic approach to education, which worked well for me.
After Harvard, what was the next step?
The next step was sort of amazing, because one day was still at Harvard. I was working on my doctorate for Harvard Law School. I had an aerogram from the United Kingdom. Now, aerogram, for those of you who are too young to know what it is the cheapest type of air letter.
Flimsy,
Flimsy, which ever existed. And I opened it, and it was a typed letter with a real signature, however, from Sir Hersch Lauterpacht.
Now, Hersch Lauterpacht, for any of you who are not lawyers, was a very famous creator of, if you like, of contemporary crimes against humanity, and did great work on that.
Before anybody knew what it was.
Absolutely, and before, I mean, he was really very fundamental to the Nuremberg trials. And so he writes to you.
So he writes to me and said, I heard about you from one of my favorite pupils, now your professor, Richard Baxter, who became later a judge in the International Court of Justice, who recommended you would like to come to Cambridge as something called humanitarian law scholar. We will offer you second-class trip by a boat from Montreal. Boston and Montreal are not terribly far away. And we will give you, your scholarship will be 400 guineas, which was a fortune.
That was a lot of money, yeah.
It was a fortune, so I went to Cambridge, and I felt very, very rich and very rich and lucky. And when I was there, I finished my doctorate for Harvard. I remember one of the sort of luxurious occupations I had at the time. Lord Victor Rothschild was a professor in Cambridge, and his wife Tessa wanted a tutor to help her with her Hebrew. And going from time to time to the Rothschild estate.
That must have been grand.
Grand, and the paintings were completely out of this world, as you would expect from Rothschild.
So you were hanging out with the high end of British society.
Well, not on the high end, but so it happens that quite a few of the people who were in fact scholars either before or after me in Cambridge were people who played a certain role in my subsequent career. There was an Egyptian scholar whose name might be well known to many of you, George Abissab, who later became a Swiss Egyptian, very famous scholar of international human rights. Hisashio Wada, whose daughter is now the Empress of Japan, merits, etc. So it was quite an experience, and since 45, the contrast between my life during the war and subsequent has been an incredible, in a way, luxury, and so many of the things that happened to me were something which were amazing, and that's why I called it again, my book, my memoir.
Your miracles.
1,000 Miracles.
Have you actually counted them? The truth is that you...
No, but I had quite a few.
You did have a few.
I had quite a few, and some of them were amazing. I tell the story of the famous flight, Swiss Air Flight 111, is a number to remember, where I was sort of commuting between my main day job at NYU Law School and Geneva, where I had a professorship, and my wife was in Geneva working for the United Nations. And I was flying, commuting every second week to spend some time with her. And I bought a ticket. And at the very last moment, for reasons which were not terribly persuasive, I decided to postpone my flight by one day. And the flight 111 took off from JFK. And when it was not far from Nova Scotia, the plane went down, not a single survivor. These things happened, and of course, one of the things where I felt that I had an absolutely incredible luck when the main big ghetto in Częstochow, the city where I spent the war, was liquidated, and we were moved, those who survived, to a tiny ghetto at the outskirts of the city. We found some kind of a very primitive lodgings next to the boundary of the ghetto. And one day, some people came with weapons. They were Jewish resistance, and told us we are going to dig a tunnel here to go under the wires.
Under the wires to get out from the...
To try and smuggle weapons in and should something terrible happen to help people escape. And we, of course, were not asked. They had weapons, we did not. And one day somebody denounced what was happening to the SS, and I came home, or what was home, that from some kind of a job I had, and
you were only, I mean, you were only a child, really.
And the area was taken over by German paratroopers. Everybody, including my maternal parents and my mother, were taken out and shot.
Mm-hmm.
And had I been at home 15 minutes earlier, I would have been with them. So I had lots of luck, and I'm very grateful.
My mother would have said your guardian angel was working hard and looking after you.
Probably, but I was very lucky. I often speak to students about careers and problems, and I say one of the things that we ought to try and see is the openings we suddenly see, the opportunities. We should not let them pass. They are temporal. They will not stay. The openings will not be there forever.
They will close up.
And so those openings is the luck that I had abundantly. Years ago, when I was visiting fellow at All Souls, I said to my wife, I would very much like for my the last reincarnation to come back to Oxford and for a permanent job and stay there. And one day it happened. Oxford asked me to come and introduce international criminal law. That was 10 years ago, which did not exist at the time in Oxford. So I consider myself a very lucky person.
You deserve as much luck as might come your way, Ted Meron. But let's just also talk about the important contributions that you've made. You went into the Foreign Service in Israel. You rose to a high enough level where you were a major advisor at the time of the Six-Day War. And after the Six-Day War, you gave a very important piece of advice to the Israeli government. What was that piece of advice?
Well, I was very lucky too. I was just before that, at the beginning of the 6 Days War, I was in New York in the Israeli mission to the United Nations, and my previous boss in Jerusalem was a famous public international lawyer, an English solicitor by the name of Shabtai Rosen. He, for some reasons, was moved to New York, and there was an opening for the legal advisor. And here, miraculously, I am being catapulted from the job of assistant legal advisor, somewhere below, to the chief legal advisor overnight. And so I move very quickly. We move to Jerusalem. And within a few weeks after that, I see my first sort of test of fire. The Prime Minister would like to know and the Foreign Minister, what do I think of the possibility, which was a major program of some ministers in the cabinet, of establishing Jewish settlements on the West Bank. And they wanted it urgently, and I wrote an opinion of 3 pages. I did not spend very much time on that. It was an obvious conclusion.
An obvious thing to you.
Later, when this opinion became known, people asked me, did you realize this was a sort of existential questions, etc.? I said, no. For me, I felt always that a legal advisor has something in common with judges. They should call the law the way it is. They should not try to cosmetize answers, not to make them more palatable to people in the cabinet. It came sort of naturally. I think it took me a day or 2 to write that. And my conclusion was that settling Jewish civilian population on the West Bank would be a clear violation of the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and should not be done. Now the government ignored it. I must admit that I did not see any repercussions or vengeance.
Yes, it's a sort of interesting thing. I think nowadays you might have actually found yourself receiving a whole kind of set of attacks from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir at the very least. But
nowadays I would have been fired.
Well, you definitely, at least. But the reality was you were, in fact, promoted further and forward.
Well, I became an ambassador. Later, but I don't know. I think that I am amazed that I was so well treated.
Mm-hmm.
I think people said, well, he must be a bit bizarre to give this opinion to the government. This is not what he was expected to do. For a few months they hesitated a bit, and the first few settlements which were established were quasi-military because it was a state of occupation, and therefore a country can have
a military presence.
Military bases. And then this was dropped.
It was developed into proper settlements.
This was somewhat of a fiction from the very beginning.
But the point of this piece of your history is that what was interesting was that they ignored your advice. Your written advice was sort of buried in the annals and disappeared from view. And then a very assiduous academic or researching those times went into the archives and found your opinion.
Yeah, that was quite amazing. I remember I was visiting my younger son who lives in Los Angeles, and I had a telephone call from somebody. I will not say now who it was, but a senior British civil servant saying, Ted, do you know you are all over the place in the New York Times today? And other newspapers, and said, what are you talking about? I got, usually being in the news is not a good thing. But he said there is a story about the settlements and your opinion on the settlement, which was discovered by a Jewish Israeli-American historian by the name of Gershon Gorenberg, who was allowed, as you say, access to the state archives, and was amazed to find this. And of course, this was a very big mistake for the archivist. He should have known that the opinions would be found, and apparently he was clever enough, Gorenberg, to realize that this is something that he should act upon immediately before it disappeared. Before this disappears. So he took a photograph. He had a camera with him. He immediately took a photograph of that. I must say that looking back at my life, I sometimes am amazed that 3 pages written by a person who was 37 years old had more sort of impact on reputation, on real life than than my 12 or 13 academic books that I've written subsequently. But it's something that makes me so sad. I think had the government accepted
Your advice.
that advice, I think that if not a complete peace, there would have been reconciliation between Jews and Arabs. And the fact that it was ignored, that the present government has multiplied its activity on settlements, makes me very, very sad. And I believe a great opportunity for peace and a two-state solution was lost.
Given that we are with limited time and you've had such a rich and incredible life, I'm going to sort of take us through the fact that you were an ambassador for a number of years. Four. It didn't appeal to you at all. You didn't like all those champagne parties and canapes and all of that, entertaining in a glamorous way.
I did not think that this was particularly my cup of tea.
I think you got more than cups of tea, but you decided it was not for you. It was not actually creating the kind of change and things that you wanted.
It was a great experience in terms of learning something about international relations.
And you then decided that actually you missed scholarship. You wanted to go back to scholarship, go back to the world of writing and books and study, and you did. So you were for a number of years in sort of leading positions in American universities. And I want to take us to then the big shift. How did you become a judge?
It was, it's really quite a story. Like most things in my life, it's a question of opportunity and luck and things that happened. I was, at that time, visiting a professor at Berkeley in California. Before that, I started working on international criminal justice. I was a member of the US delegation to the conference in Rome, which adopted the statute of the International Criminal Court. I was in the famous Copenhagen conference on human dimension, which looked at progress and reforms in human rights, which under Gorbachev were happening in Eastern Europe. And
I mean, you didn't. I mean, I think it's fair to say you didn't lead a quiet life as an academic. You were actually, because of the nature of your expertise, you were drawn into quite a lot of international conferences, consultations, and so on.
Which I very much appreciated. After all, I was a newcomer to the United States, and the fact that they have appointed me to those delegations was something which I very much appreciated. But let's go back to Berkeley. That year, the first part of the year, I spent as a visiting professor at Harvard Law School. I must say I was very touched. It was a poignant moment that after the tremendous contribution that Harvard made to my education, they invited me as visiting professor. So I really appreciate it. And then I was in Berkeley, and my wife Monique was with me. And we tried to spend most of the weekends exploring the glorious coast of California and see the sea, the animals. It was quite an experience. And one day, I was contacted by the State Department, and they said, we have a problem with Iran. Iran has been attacking our commercial shipping in the Gulf, and
just for something new.
And we have responded by attacking something called oil platforms of Iran, and now they're taking us, imagine, to the International Court of Justice, and we would very much benefit from your opinions on a number of issues. So they send me questions. And since I promised my wife that we will be traveling during the weekend, I had a yellow pad like that, And whenever I had an idea about something, I would stop, write it down, and so on. And it just lasted about 2 or 3 months. And then a note from the most senior civil servant in the State Department on the legal side. How would you feel about coming to Washington for a year or so as Counsel on International Law? Wow! State Department Counsel on International Law. That will be exciting. But I realized that I had 1 year sabbatical from NYU, so I had to ask the dean. He said that would be very good for our reputation and yours. and you should go. So I was there, and when I was there, the American judge on the international on the special tribunal for former Yugoslavia, Patricia Walt, who was a very senior judge in Washington in the federal court, had to resign to go back to Washington because of illness of her husband. And the State Department made an announcement. They're searching for a judge, for an American judge, for the job. And I said to myself, well, to be involved in judging war crimes and crimes against humanity, for me, who has in a way learned something on the receiving side of those, would be exciting, so I decided to apply. And there was the State Department appointed a committee of 5, which unanimously decided to recommend me. And that was a long story about which you have read, but eventually, luck again, I was nominated because there were some problems. I was nominated, I was listed as a candidate by the UN Security Council. And then here I was, an ex-Israeli diplomat, a Jew, somebody who knew something about the cost, in a way, of being a Jew, of being nominated by the United States for criminal judgeship. And I said to myself, if I fail, it will be the last time that a Jew with my kind of background will ever be nominated, because the Arabists in the State Department would not appreciate that, and they would draw a conclusion from my failure. And I remember there was an Egyptian permanent representative to the UN who said to the election officer I had was supplied by the US mission, I read Meron's CV, and I am quite convinced that he will be fair to the Muslims. And I'm going to support him, and I'm going to persuade Muslim states to vote for him. And eventually there is a vote. There are 14 vacancies. And not only I am elected, but I get the 3rd highest number of votes. And then I said to myself, my immediate reaction was sort of almost intimidation. How am I going to do a decent job? I have never, except for a case or two, practiced law. So the last few months before I went to the Hague, I tried to read anything I could about international criminal justice, about procedure, etc. And how will I be able to dispense justice fairly without fear or favor? And those 20 years or so spent at The Hague were the most important, the most creative part of my life, because here we were really doing after 50 years of international criminal justice not existing since Nuremberg, being the first international UN court. It was almost a utopian existence that you say, I had to pinch myself, I am really doing that. And after a year and a half or so at The Hague, a colleague of mine said, I want to tell you, some of us are thinking that we would really very much appreciate it if you would present your candidature for presidency of the court for being Chief Justice, which also sounded completely crazy, but what happened is the French president decided to apply for judgeship in the International Criminal Court. So I did, and I was elected over time, 4 times for mandates on the court, and then 3 times in the following instrument. But one thing which really touched me very deeply in terms of luck, when the court was being created, I was one of the editors of the American Journal of International Law. And I must tell you, Helena, even you might not remember that at that time, rape of women in non-international armed conflicts was not considered to be a war crime.
It wasn't a war crime, I know.
It was not, and you know the mass rapes which were committed in former Yugoslavia. So I wrote, I found it completely morally unacceptable. So I wrote this piece for the American Journal called Rape as a War Crime, which was quite influential, but that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that as a very junior judge, I was supposed to go on a trial bench. This was the correct thing to do. And that somebody was already designed to go to fill a vacancy in the appeals chamber. At the very last moment, it appears that that person cannot go in an appeals chamber because one of the other judges has the same nationality. At that time, this was no. So I was appointed. I never was on the trial chamber, which added, of course, to my being ignoramus in international criminal law. But I was on the appeals chamber, and the very first case to which I was appointed was a case called Kunarak, which pertained to a small community by the name of Foča in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where the occupation unit of the Serbian army was consisted of only privates, not even a sergeant. And they appropriated to themselves a group of teenage girls, Bosnian girls, 20, 30 of them, and took them as sex slaves.
Yes.
For and we at that time, and I was part of the bench, and the international law on crime was almost as backward as it was when I wrote that article some years before. And although I did not preside over the bench, needless to say, because of my earlier interest in that, I had some influence on the judgment. For example, at that time, unless a woman could show that she showed during the attempt, when somebody was attempting to...
She had to fight back.
She had to fight back. She has shown to show, quote unquote, continuous resistance. Mm-hmm. Come on, a woman who will show continuous resistance will have her throat cut in 1 second. So we changed completely the law, and from use of force, what we made as the main element of rape was absence of consent.
And it was a great breakthrough, it really was.
That was a breakthrough.
That was a breakthrough, and I hold it to my heart that you did that. That was such a brilliant...
Yes, I'm I am proud of the Palestine opinions. I am proud of the Kunarak case.
Of the
because we were really the architects of modern, progressive, reasonable international criminal law, which will, for once, take account of the fact that victims of war so often are women who are being raped.
And that rape is often a weapon of war.
And
the silence around it existed for so
long.
Now
you read during what was happening in South Sudan now.
Oh, it's absolutely atrocious.
But I'm so lucky that I was part of this, of the people who had the opportunity to write the new...
Real change.
Real change.
Ted, I've been very, very neglectful in that we've got to come to an end, but I want some people to ask some questions before we finish.
Sure.
And we're running out of time. So look, hands are going up, even as I mentioned those words.
Maybe.
Ted, you are a hero, and you have done so much in your life. And I know you insist that it was largely about luck, but it wasn't about luck. It was about the fact that your brilliance, your humanity, your compassion, your empathy, all those things have made you an exceptional lawyer, an exceptional judge, and a great human being. But I'm going to get some questions in here from this audience.
Can we have a rule, one question on per person?
One person by per, and we're going to do really quick fire. Sir, question.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing everything. So I run a charity and we do cash transfers to people experiencing homelessness. So you won't be surprised to hear that a lot of my friends are very lefty and progressive. But I found actually quite recently a pretty troubling, quite scary opinion forming that, the collapse of the international law order right now is like good because it's very thin neoliberal veil being ripped off because it never stopped the US from dropping Agent Orange in Vietnam and bombing 3 kilometers of residential housing in Hanoi, so what would you say to that?
I mean, it's the old hypocrisy question, which is,
Is international law collapsing? That's your question.
Yes, is it collapsing, and doesn't it in some ways deserve to collapse because it was a bit of a pretense in so many circumstances?
It was not too solid before.
Yeah.
But I am not one of those who is completely pessimistic about the future. I am aware of the fact that many of the institutions which helped maintain peace since Nuremberg are now in very bad state. I am aware of the fact that in the United States particularly, there is such a retreat from concepts which were dear to the United States under previous administrations. And I don't have to spell this out. But I would not subscribe to a sort of apocalyptical conclusion that this is the end of the story. It is not. If you look at the past, at the development of international law, it has never been linear progress constantly. You have had ups and downs and ups and downs. And sometimes the most horrible violations of the law have led also to tremendous improvements and reforms of the law. The American Civil War was a horribly bloody war in which millions and millions died. But after the war, one of the results of the war was the Lieber Code in the United States, which was one of the most advanced for the time codes of conduct of law of conduct of war, which was influential on later drafting of the Hague Conventions, Geneva Conventions, and so on. Take the Holocaust, unprecedented industrial killing that one could not imagine. There were killings before, there were massacres and genocides before, but this industrialization, the introduction of the German efficiency to a killing machine, this was something new. But then what happened after the war? We had the Convention Against Genocide. We had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We had the Covenants on Human Rights. We had the whole new generation of young people who believed that human rights are something which is a real thing for which it is worthwhile fighting. So I believe we now have a few bad years. I am encouraged by the fact that despite the American sanctions against the International Criminal Court, sanctions which are extremely retrogressive, sanctions that may endanger, if they continue, the survival of the International Criminal Court, that they have not brought about so far, touch wood, the paralysis of the International Criminal Court, which continues to function. And if I may say so, one of my great experiences and lucky points in life was that I was part of this group of six. Before that, I was special advisor to the prosecutor, and I worked on deportation of Ukrainian children and so on. But one of the great things was that I was a part of this group of six, and the luck here was becoming a friend of Helena.
What are you going to ask? Similar question. Hands up near the back. I saw a hand there, sir, up there. Okay.
Hi.
Okay, fine.
Thank you. Super interesting discussion. I think, as you sort of said, there are dark days on the horizon. And as someone who I suspect has endured more dark days than the average person, what advice would you give to us to navigate those dark days and indeed even turn them into opportunities, as you said, might be the case?
Thank you for asking. I think that people who are in this field, international criminal justice, international humanitarian law, must be, in order to work in their field, they must be a tiny bit or more than a tiny bit optimistic. Mm-hmm. You must believe that things will become better. I'm sure they will become better. Trump will not be the last president of the United States. And that ups and downs will sort of figure itself out, and we will be in better state probably some years from now. But we must believe in what we are doing, and to believe in what we are doing and to make it worthwhile, we must also be a tiny bit on the optimistic side. And I realize that with my childhood, this is not something that you would necessarily expect me to say, but I strongly believe in that.
So we have to persist, and we have to, I think, I really do think that one of the things that we, and I say this because I have my own moments of the blues thinking about how things are going, but I do take sustenance from all the good people that I work with, and the people who, golly, look what's happening in Iran just now, and the courage of those people, and they deserve our support and our help to keep on arguing for the things that we know will ultimately make the difference. So I just, relish the good things that we also see people around us doing, and take some time out as well. Anyway, there was a hand in the back. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. It was absolutely fascinating, moving. I just want to ask about the importance of, when one is in peace processes, of building peace, of also having accountability, because it does seem that compared to some of the conflicts you were involved in resolving or in the aftermath, the current peacemaking misses out the need for accountability and justice.
Are you asking this in any particular context?
Well, I mean, here we are. President Trump is busy serenading his triumphs in creating peace in all sorts of places, and it doesn't much look like peace to me. And so it's that question of, isn't accountability fundamental to genuine, long-lasting peace? And yet we're not seeing much in the way of accountability at the moment. I mean, if there was a deal done tomorrow in Ukraine and Russia, you can be damn sure it's not going to involve Putin going on trial. It's not going to, the chances of Netanyahu going on trial are pretty slim. The chances, there's even Duterte just now is busy. I was just telling Ted earlier that I'm working with some people on putting in an amicus brief against this business, where Duterte's lawyers are trying to say that there's no jurisdiction in the International Criminal Court, although they've got him arrested, he's in The Hague, in jail, and they're calling for his release, saying that there's no jurisdiction. The court decided that there was jurisdiction, but he's now appealing it to the higher court. And so organizations, human rights organizations like the one that I currently am leading, can put in an amicus brief, and that's what we're doing. But it's important to keep working at these things and to make sure that there is accountability, because I don't see it happening in relation to either Ukraine, the Russian persons who have got warrants out against them. I don't see the Taliban leadership being arrested any day soon, although there are warrants out for them. I don't see Netanyahu. I'm sure that a free pass will be given to him at some point soon. And so the Dutertes are one hope of showing that it doesn't matter how much long afterwards. Sometimes you have to wait a long time, but that eventually justice will catch up with certain people, and we have to let people shiver in their timbers, thinking the long arm of the law might come and reach for me at some point.
I very much agree with what Helena said. Accountability is absolutely important for prospects for a more peaceful society. Unless conflicts end with some kind of a sense that there was a measure of accountability, the feelings of vengeance and attempt to recover territories over which you claim some kind of a title will persevere. That's why it's so important that we now have still international criminal tribunals, that the tribunals realize that their vitality and survival will be based on fairness and law and evidence that those tribunals apply. They know that if they look for agendas which are political or politically influenced, that will be the end of international criminal justice. And that would be terrible. And one of the things about which I feel good, looking back at my own 2 decades or so on the international bench, is the extent to which we managed, in contrast to Nuremberg, in contrast to Tokyo, to show that international tribunals operate on the principle of fairness and operate on the narrow judicial agenda that we have established for ourselves. Agenda which is based on law and evidence and nothing else. And even if you have objects which in themselves are desirable, you cannot take them into account for your judicial decisions. And what we are doing in terms of accountability is important not only for criminal law and humanitarian law, it is important also for its influence on peacemaking and the reconciliation between people. So I'm very grateful for the questions that you have asked.
Before we wind up completely, I just want to say that in that business of judging, one of the things that was so interesting to me, Ted, is that that the seriousness with which you took that role, judging, as you've said, over 2 decades, and the responsibility of fairness in all that you were doing, that there was the occasion when in one of those cases you acquitted the person in front of you, and there was an outrage because people wanted everyone to be convicted. And you acquitted because the evidence didn't reach the standard that was required for conviction.
Yes, thank you for asking that, because it's an issue.
It's such an issue.
On which I feel very, very strongly. I sat or presided over something like 30 plus, between 30 and 40 appeals. Every 5th appellant, I led the court in reversing the judgment and in acquitting. And I was very much concerned about the fact that in public opinion, if an international prosecutor is bringing charges against somebody, the public reading of the situation would be, if an international prosecutor brings charges, it surely means that the person comes not only with a narrative of guilt, he's probably guilty. Mm-hmm. And this is that I strongly resisted. And I was very harshly criticized for leading the bench in reversing convictions. And it's something of which I'm very proud, because it shows that international criminal law is reaching some kind of a maturity. That if every fifth or every sixth appellant is acquitted, it shows that we do not come with a predetermined agenda, that everyone who is accused must be convicted. One of the chapters in my book is called Surviving the Acquittal of General Gotovina. Mm-hmm. General Gotovina was a Croatian war hero who was convicted by the trial chamber for something like 24 years of imprisonment because of bombing or artillery, by using artillery of 4 Serb-inhabited townships. And we, on the appeals, we found that there was no basis for the basic rationale used by I will not bother use the details, by the trial chamber. And with a very tiny majority, 3-2, mm-hmm. You could not have a smaller majority, we acquitted, reversed the conviction of Gotovina and let him go. And the whole world for 2 or 3 years was against me. I mean, not only enemies of international justice, but friends of international justice. How could you let this man go? Yeah. And I had applying, guiding basic principles. We had no choice.
Did the evidence reach the threshold?
And then luck in life. Eventually, the question got to the International Court of Justice, which, as you know, has no hierarchical authority over our tribunals. But it's the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. And the Council for Serbia criticized me in personal terms, saying, had Judge Meron not made those terrible errors in Gotovina case, our chance of proving that Serbia is committing genocide would have been so much better. So they made it such a critical point in their pleading that the International Court of Justice had no choice but had to deal with the Gotovina case. And eventually, 6 printed pages, it's a lot for a court, accepted unanimously by the bench.
That you were right.
By the bench that not only I was right, but that they looked at the evidence and they could find nothing which would undermine our conclusions. So you have to do those things which are right and don't give a damn about political consequences.
Well, I mean, it's that whole business of that. Otherwise, it's seen as victor's justice.
Otherwise, it's victor's justice.
And victor's justice, it will never have the respect of the wider public. Now, listen, I have to call it to an end. It's been a really wonderful, wonderful opportunity to hear from you, Ted, and you really are a heroic figure in our midst. And listen. I'm going to encourage all of you to get his book, and he's going to be sitting over there signing it. And thank you, and would you show your appreciation to Ted?